want to welcome you to the 2016 Iowa City Book Festival presented by the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature. We want to thank all our sponsors for this event, the City of Iowa City, the University of Iowa, the Iowa Arts Council, Sheraton Iowa City, the Iowa City Public Library, and the Iowa City Coralville Convention and Visitors Bureau and Iowa Tourism. I am going to turn this program over to Hugh Farrar, who's going to introduce our guests. Hugh is also on the board of the City of Literature, and I've gotten to know him. He's a great guy. Very insightful. Oh, you just, the things you say every time, I pay attention.
You learn something every day. That is great.
He was the assistant director, is that the right title? Of the associate director of the International Writing Program at the University of Iowa. And he is going to introduce our illustrious panel today.
It is an illustrious panel. Hello. Good morning, everybody. I'm Hugh Farrar. Today, as part of the panel discussion on sense of place, we're going to hear from, as Susan said, a very distinguished panel, and we're going to be discussing the role of place and setting in their writing. And let me start at the far end with Ukamaka Olisakwe, a screenwriter and novelist from Nigeria, selected in 2014 by the Africa 39 Project as one of the continent's 39 most promising writers under the age of 40. She has had her work appear in the New York Times, among other places. Next to her is Virginia Suk Yin Ng, who writes stories, often about her generation's life in contemporary Hong Kong. She works as a communications consultant. Marc Nieson, a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and the New York University Film School, and we would also say to a degree the International Writing Program, where he worked when he was a grad student. His memoir, Schoolhouse Lessons in Love and Landscape, is now out from Ice Cube Press, and that deals with the farmhouse, Redbird Farm, which the International Writing Program visits every year. Courtney Sina Meredith is a poet, playwright, and musician from New Zealand. Her latest release is Tales of the Tanahua.
It's close. Close enough. It's close enough.
And next to me is Allen Eskens, an award-winning and USA Today best-selling author of The Life We Bury. He studied at the Summer Writing Festival here in Iowa and lives in Minneapolis. His new novel is Heavens May Fall. Allen, if you don't mind, maybe we'll start with you. I was hoping that the panelists would make contribute some thoughts to a discussion, and then we'll have questions and talk with each other.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Any topic you want to talk about?
Well, why don't we talk about place and how it fits into your writing?
I think I'm more the local flavor. I grew up here in the Midwest. I actually grew up in Missouri, and I ran away from home in Missouri to go to college, actually here at Iowa. Then I transferred to University of Minnesota, got my degree there, and live in Minnesota now. And my books so far are all located in Minnesota. But just, the discussion here is about place. Just the move from Missouri to Iowa was a huge difference in culture. I can't imagine, going from Korea to here. And from here to Minnesota was a very different sense of culture and place. And going from Missouri to Minnesota, the difference in temperature and weather was a huge shock. When I got to Minnesota, I learned that it got cold enough that your eyes could freeze shut. I didn't know that even existed before that. So that's kind of my sense of place.
Yeah. Great.
Courtney, do you want to add something?
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. 10 a.m. on a Saturday when you could be at the markets.
Right.
Thanks for being here with us instead. So I'm from New Zealand, as Hugh said. My ancestry, though, actually comes from the South Pacific. So my mother is actually from Samoa, and my father is a mixture of Irish and also Mangayan. Mangaya being the second biggest island of the Cook Islands. I guess when you're talking about place and belonging in my work, I think I've made some really deliberate choices to populate the page with things that are familiar to me. And I've done that quite purposefully because, to be very honest, there just isn't much literature out there at all that's written from the perspective of a young Pacific Island woman living in New Zealand right now. So for me, it's been quite deliberate. In saying that, I think my poetry tends to be a lot more aspirational, and the place that I might be speaking about is more metaphorical. I have a vision of really empowered Pacific Island women in the future. And a lot of my poetry is dealing with how you kind of navigate that path. When I was growing up in Auckland, that's where I'm from, so Auckland, New Zealand, there weren't any books that represented my worldview. I wasn't represented on the television, the radio. There really wasn't anyone in Parliament where I would look at her and think, she is just like me. She looks and she sounds like me, and she has the same ideas and the same aspirations that I do. So a lot of my early works in my poetry, you look at my first book, Brown Girls in Bright Red Lipstick, my first play, Rushing Dolls, an essay series, Blue Crowned Lorikeet. I was basically throwing up constellations of my own in front of me to kind of work towards this idea that these women were smart, savvy, well-travelled, articulate, educated, that they weren't just these support acts for men coming from the South Pacific, especially in Polynesia, where it is still a really oppressive culture, very patriarchal, and you really do just have women in these support roles. So that was kind of the beginning of my work, and amazingly, the more work I put out that was dealing with that place or that sense of belonging in the future, those visions kind of connected with a younger generation around me. And I had no idea that my work would be that inspirational to other young brown women. And I think what's been interesting in my travels over the last 5 years, definitely over the last 5 years, is meeting women from other countries and other cultures who completely identify with the place that I'm talking about. Because the place that I'm talking about is being at the centre of our own narratives, and not being on the fringes, and not being seen as the other, and really kind of having women in these decision-making and leadership roles. So that's really what my work is still dealing with. My prose tends to maybe be a little bit more realist as well, and it's all peppered with a lot of Māori and Samoan terms too. My latest book, which I have refused to put a glossary into as well.
You go.
I know, you go, girl, which is a bit of a political act. But it definitely, the work belongs in New Zealand, and it kind of breathes and has a life of its own in New Zealand. But with my new book, it refers to, Berlin, other places I've travelled to, Indonesia, New York as well. So I would recommend reading both books, basically. But thank you. Thanks again for being here.
Thank you. Hi, again, I'm Marc Nieson. Thanks for coming out here. Not just with a gorgeous day out there, but there's other offerings around here. So I don't know about the rest of us. I'm pretty touched that you're here today, so thank you. My own background, blood-wise, for as much as we could tell, I guess I come from Eastern European stock, mostly Poland, though the borders kept shifting, so it's sort of hard to tell. And I suspect some Italian slipped through the sheets at some point also in our history, because there's a weird strain of interest in Italy that runs through my mother's side of the family. My writings, it's an interesting question about place, because I think when I first started out writing, I think I was very intent on trying to write things that were every woman, every man's story, in a way. I found myself trying very hard not to necessarily set the work in some specific place, thinking that this is something that can perhaps make it more communal, more timeless, maybe. And those were years where I suddenly came to realize, well, that's not really very smart. Everybody is part of some place and some time. And the more specific you can get about the personal, the more you can actually then make connections to the communal. The book that Hugh mentioned, Schoolhouse, is set primarily about 15 miles west of town here. There was an old one-room schoolhouse that I was able to live in for a couple of years on Redbird Farm. We often called it the Borgelli Schoolhouse, is where Vance Borgelli and Tina Borgelli and their family had owned and stewarded that land. And also within the book, I mentioned I'm sort of from Eastern Europe, but I've never actually seen Eastern Europe. I'm from Brooklyn, New York originally. And so the Brooklyn boy found himself living out here in the middle of the Midwest, and this place completely turned my life upside down and around, and I'm thankful for that. In the book, I'm trying to weigh out some of the different places. You're talking about trying to figure out where does one belong, and well into my 30s even, I had no sense of that, and I think I've only garnered a sense of that maybe in the last 15, 20 years. I think becoming a parent suddenly made me understand where do I belong, and I belong with my family, wherever that happens to be. But in Schoolhouse, there are three main geographic areas that we're looking at. One is this spot here in the middle of Iowa. Another is looking at New York City, where I grew up. And the third is also looking at Venice, Italy, where I lived for about 3 years. And all of these things, I realized I was probably a different person in each one of those places. And trying to look at that component, I don't think any of us exist outside of place, and why should our characters on the page do any differently?
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Virginia. I'm from Hong Kong. I write in Chinese, and since English is my acquired language, and this is actually can be quite a complex subject matter, so I've set out my thoughts on paper, and if you would bear with me for a while, I'll read out my piece verbatim. Okay. Part 1, my take on the topic. What is the role of place in fiction writing? My experience is that place is but one of many literary tools at the writer's disposal. It is not indispensable, but always useful. It is an option, not a must. A sense of place is useful as a point of departure, a launching pad for the story, but not the end point. A place can help launch the story, but the story must eventually ascend to a higher level and operate in a new space different from that in which it was launched. Part 2, my place, my city. During Hong Kong's colonial years from 1842 to 1997, our sense of place was very distinct. In those 150 years, our city was built on the premise of borrowed time, borrowed space, meaning it was largely based on a set of lease treaties between the United Kingdom and China's Imperial Qing dynasty in the mid-19th century, after China's defeat in the First Opium War. The deadline of the lease, or the key lease, was 1997. The colony was leased with no promise of certainty. No one knew what was going to happen when the lease expired. Most of us in Hong Kong, like me, who grew up in the 1960s and 80s, and the 60s to the 80s, in fact had great difficulty understanding what long-term meant, what the term permanence meant, as the looming 1997 deadline was in the way of all sorts of forward planning. The term long-term to us was perhaps 3 to 5 years, and permanence, like eternity, was ever a mysterious and inexplicable concept. Now that 1997 is finally behind us, we have a new deadline, however, in 2047, that is 2047, when the 50-year arrangement of Beijing's one country, two systems framework for Hong Kong will come to an end. The question is, of course, whether after the year 2047, Hong Kong has to adopt mainland China's political and legal systems with a more coercive regime diametrically opposed to our understanding and our living experience of an open society, which Hong Kong is and still is today. Our sovereign power has changed from the UK to China, but we, the Hong Kongers, 7 million of us, still live in the old borrowed time, borrowed space paradigm. In our anxiety, Hong Kongers, including myself, squander millions of dollars, I mean Hong Kong dollars, on the real estate purchases so that we can be the owner of a very small flat as small as a shoebox, perhaps not larger than your bathroom in your house. Because in our minds, ownership of a tiny flat that we can truly call our own gives us a semblance of control and permanence. Historically, Hong Kong has always been a subversive base for revolutionaries and a laboratory for China to experiment with different methods for its own modernization. It is also a stepping stone for many Western powers and businesses to gain a foothold in mainland China. For many Hong Kongers, our city is also only a stepping stone to other first world countries, like here or Canada, deemed more secure, more desirable for the next generation. For many, my city, Hong Kong, is never a final destination. In a sense, my city and my people have always been used as a tool. Maybe we also see ourselves as a tool, with very little intrinsic value of our own. The anxiety of time, place, and identity, no doubt, has rubbed off on our writing. That's it.
Okay, my name is Ukamaka Olisakwe. I'm from Nigeria. My parents are originally from the southeastern part of Nigeria, what you call the Christian South, because Nigeria is divided along ethnic lines and religious lines. So the Christians are predominant in the south, and the Muslims are predominant in the north. So, but my parents are originally from the south, and my father moved to the north in 1970, married my mother. I was born in the north. So whenever I'm asked to fill out, there's this thing we do in Nigeria, you are asked to fill out your state of origin. I'm always confused. So where am I from? Am I from the south, where my parents are originally from, which I only visit maybe once in 2 years? Or am I from the north, which is Muslim north? Well, I am a Christian girl who is heavily segregated against in the north. So to show you how this place and setting really affects or binds, paints the context of a story and how it affects me as a storyteller, I would like to read an excerpt of my short piece in the New York Times published in 2014, just a page and a half. An excerpt, not the full story. My father arrived in Kano one cold morning in 1970 with a dry, dusting Harmattan wind blowing south from the desert. He was 23, and like many young Christians from Nigeria's lush southeast, he had gone to the Muslim-majority north after surviving the bloody civil war of 1960 to 1970. Kano was the new business frontier, but it was uneasy too. While Muslims and Christians lived side by side, so did hope and fear. In December 1980, hope took a terrible blow when Yantasine, a group led by the Islamic preacher Metasine, took to the streets in a blaze of violence. Like Boko Haram of today, Metasine reviled westernization. He had declared himself a prophet and clashed with the police, but was supported by some Muslim clerics. My father remembers shuddering in fear alongside other Christians in the neighborhood as the bloodshed snuffed out over 4,000 lives. Eventually, the Nigerian army arrived. Metasine was killed, and his followers fled to the neighboring states to continue their insurgency. A period of peace in Kano followed. My father married. I was born. My parents were protective, too much so, I thought. They hardly ever let me venture outside our neighborhood, Sebongeri, or to go near a mosque on Fridays during the Friday prayer. I could not understand why, and eventually I began to rebel. One day in October 1991, when I was not quite 9 years old, I walked towards a large mosque near our home. It was on a Friday, and the street was closed. From afar, I could see worshippers on prayer mats in the road. The mosque's loudspeakers spewed out anger, and I wondered if this anger was why my parents wanted us to stay away. Then suddenly, worshippers spilled from the building, chanting in Arabic, punching the air with their fists. I ran home dazed. Later that evening, we were told that a proselytizing German Christian evangelist called Reinhard Bonke had planned to visit Kano. The following Monday, tension smothered us like a thick veil. School closed early. Some Muslim classmates and teachers didn't show up at all. Grown-ups muttered in hushed voices. We children would later learn that hundreds of Muslim demonstrators had taken to the streets protesting Mr. Bonke's visit, and rioting ensued in which Christians were attacked and killed, an estimated 200 in the city and nearby. Eventually, Christians counterattacked, killing Muslims. For hours, I tried to wish away the screams I was hearing. For days, the air stank of burnt flesh and decaying bodies on the streets. Mosques lay in ruins in my neighborhood. 2 days after the crisis started, the Nigerian army arrived, and within a week, the cleanup crews cleared the streets, but the smell lingered. At home, we no longer laughed. Father returned to his shop, mother to her food kiosks, and we children to school. We all stayed away from mosques, but in time, our memories of the riot were thrust aside as if into dusty closets. We talked about almost anything else, the coming Harmattan, how we could taste Christmas on our lips if we threw our mouths open and sucked in the cold air. On Christmas Eve, we played with firecrackers. By morning, we wore new clothes to church. We stuffed ourselves full of rice, goat meat, and Fanta, and the decade began flitting by quietly, with little special for a child to remember or mourn. In 2001, fully grown, I left Kano, northern Nigeria, to live with my husband in Aba, the southeastern city where my father grew up. The air here, I discovered, bubbles with people's unrestrained stomach-clenching laughter, and for weeks, it made me jittery. I couldn't put a finger on why. It was not just the Southerners' posterior stalk or the shocking Western way the women dressed. Here, girls could wear skirts so short they dare not bend over. Their makeup stood out like street signs, and when they talked to boys, they stared them straight in the eyes. I missed home, and that's home, Kano, in northern Nigeria. And on my first visit to the market, I heard a box conductor call out, "Mosques, mosques." I hopped on the bus and rode to the mosque, in front of which old men sold suya, a spicy northern meat kebab. I greeted the seller in the North Hausa language. Beaming, he returned the greetings in Igbo, the language of the Southeast. Had I been to the North, he asked. I said I had just left. I ordered the suya, and he served me twice as much as I had paid for. Thanking him, I started to leave, but I kept staring at the mosques. And then I realized what made me feel jittery all this while. It was the absence of fear. I had learned to live with fear in the North. It had become a second skin, and losing it dazed me. I missed it and the boundaries, he said. So eventually I called my parents and I told them I wasn't sure if I liked this new freedom, because in the North we lived in fear. We dare not talk, we dare not question things, but in the South, the cultural shock was just too much for me to handle. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. That's a lot of ideas. It's always exciting to hear from each writer and realize how a single phrase, a short description can inspire, touches different ways that the writers approach, whether it's geography or heritage, and so one of the things that I'd like to hear a little bit more, I heard traces of it, whether it's about fear or larger social cultural issues and history, is how start to bring these ideas together. One of them is about the concept of permission and the relationship of how a place does or doesn't give you permission to write about it, and whether or not you feel at home someplace, and there's something, I was hearing a bit in Courtney what you were saying, that there was, you arrived literarily in a place that didn't necessarily have permission for you to write. No. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to overstate its pre-existence. Yeah, but so how did you build a place in which you had your imagination, not just you as a political being, but you as a writer, you as somebody who's imagining scenarios, have permission to write a certain place?
It's a really interesting, big question, Hugh. Thank you.
All right.
I think for me...
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Put me on the spot, that's fine. I grew up in a very different narrative to what I saw reflected in the Pacific and New Zealand literature that was available to me. So I grew up around really empowered women. My mother, first and foremost, she was the first writer that I ever met. And even as a child, she would read all of her poems to me. My bookshelf was always stacked. I was just this really, really intense reader as a child and as a teenager. I just couldn't read enough. But in everything that I was reading, there wasn't a presence on the page that spoke directly to my experience. And I think I was just naive in going to university, where I imagined I would spread my wings and I would have this fantastic support from the faculty around me. My experience was, first of all, I went to law school for 3 years and then realised that I wasn't going to find the justice that I was looking for there. And then I cross-credited everything over into my arts degree, and the messaging that I was getting from the professors around me while I was still a very new, very young writer was, your writing is great, your writing is fantastic, however, you need to bring it to the centre. It's too alien. You can't include these words and these terms from your own personal experience. If you want to be published and if you want to get your work out there, you're going to have to make some changes. And the centre, as we all know, is just a bit of a euphemism for it. I needed to kind of whitewash my work and to water down my voice and to make it more universal. And to be very fair to those professors, I think that they were just speaking from their own experiences. And I don't think that they realised at the time the kind of impact that it would have on me, and that it was the best advice, because I realised if they want me to write in the centre so much, it must mean that wherever I'm writing now doesn't really exist. And something that doesn't exist surely can have its own market, because there isn't one already, so I can just develop my own. And then I learned over time, theories of if everyone's swimming this way, the salmon swims upstream, things like that, which kind of helped me. But it wasn't a vanity project, and it didn't come from a place of me thinking, I don't care about the rest of New Zealand literature and the Pacific literature that's gone before me, which is kind of this internal stuck between worlds. I don't know who I am. Do I belong in the South Pacific Islands, or do I belong here in New Zealand? That was never my narrative. And it wasn't a vanity project in terms of putting this brand new voice and a brand new vision on the page. I seriously, and I still do, had a very, very strong belief that I was speaking for a lot of people, that it wasn't just me. And I peer-reviewed those thoughts with the friends around me, people I was at university with at the time, artists that I knew who were out in the community doing great things, young business people as well, entrepreneurs, people who kind of had a very different vision of how New Zealand would look and feel in the generations to come. I think by 2050, only 1 in 2 people in New Zealand will be Pākehā, which Pākehā being the Māori term for white, or non-Māori per se. And once I kind of figured out all of these little bits and pieces, and I'd done quite a bit of research, and I looked into the policy of most of the ministries that were supposed to be servicing my community and that I felt weren't, and I saw a lot of loopholes, and I saw a lot of fat, a lot of money that should have been spent on Pacific and Māori youth, which really was just going to administrators and bureaucrats. I found a place for my voice that was bigger than the page. And that's still the journey, and it's always going to be there, though. It's always going to be in development beyond my lifetime.
Cool, Marc, you look like you've got something.
Well, I was thinking about what is that phrase that you have this choice at some point in time whether you ask permission or you ask forgiveness, something like that, right? And I think probably most of my life I've done the latter, and I think to some extent where I have bounced around the world, I've done without permission, or I've done with feeling like I have the rights, just by virtue of I'm curious about the world and I can go around. But I think the freedom with which I may have moved around and entered into places has a lot to do with the basis of being maybe male, maybe being Caucasian, to those extents, or maybe also being able to put together the funds to be able to go somewhere and stay there. In terms of the writing component about that, I think I haven't thought about permission again in that area so much as more in terms of accountability. And how can I represent a place if I'm going to write about it with any kind of credibility? And obviously, we're all writers or lovers of literature, certainly within this room, and there's the classic thing of, well, you have to get all the details down onto the page, and that's how you sort of render a place with any kind of honesty. So obviously you have to get involved. I think it's not unusual that the title of this is Sense of Place, right? And I think you have to do it through the senses, and that's how you ultimately come to a place. And obviously you're using your eyes, you're using your ears, you're using your touch, you're doing all these kinds of things to create a three-dimensional place that on something that's ultimately a two-dimensional plane. I think one of the things that I end up thinking that I try and do ultimately, one of the ways I've been thinking about place is in terms of atmosphere. And so how do you capture an atmosphere of a place more than anything else? And some of that may have to do with place hopefully permits me access if I am opening my ears and I'm trying to receive it. And then I think ultimately, hopefully what comes out on the page, sort of, I've always tried to think of it as like a soundtrack. What's the soundtrack of a place? What does it feel like, not necessarily in terms of touch, but what does it feel like within us? Because that's ultimately the thing that we're trying to, I think, render on the page isn't just the exterior landscape, but how it affects our interior landscape.
So you feel you're recording a place or witnessing places and trying to do justice to them, and not so much trying to create a place? Or is creation for you like getting it right as it is?
I think, well, in terms of the nonfiction, that's one thing. In terms of the fiction, I think I do write about different places I travel to. Chile recently, Turkey in previous years, and what I try and do is at least render, I'm there for like a minimum amount of time. Venice I felt I could write about because I lived there for 3 years and I think I felt something there. Iowa I felt I could write about personally because I lived here for a number of years, and I'm hoping to do it justice on the page. Some of these other places I travel to for 2-3 weeks sometimes, and I come back saying, okay, I'm gonna, what the hell do I know about this place? I just got a snapshot of it. And maybe in those senses I end up going into a fictional world more, but I still am trying somehow to do honor to what is the cultural context of the place as best as I can render it and set it in not just place but time as well. I'm thinking, let's just say at the top of my head, a piece that was set in Turkey involves someone who had emigrated from the south of Turkey and came up to the north to a city, and that's a basic communal thing. A lot of people moving from outside into being forced to some extent economically to move into cities and getting into the circumstances of a life dealing with that. And I'm currently working on a short story that is set in Patagonia and deals with someone who had moved there from Uruguay, and just the sort of the feelings about what it means to be in a place, and for him to actually feel like he belongs in this place, even though we're all of us mutts. I don't care on some level. We're all of us mutts, but we're all. I don't know. I'll talk about that later. Maybe let's let someone else talk on permission.
Alan, when I think about partly what Marc was just saying about it's the people in places and how the people bring the characters, bring a place to life. When I was a young writer, I wrote this. It was just unbelievably beautiful as a description of trees and woods and stuff. But there weren't a lot of people in it, and the people in my workshop sort of said, pastoralism, died 100 years ago. We don't write that way anymore. Do you want to elaborate a little bit about how your people bring your place to life?
Yeah, I think there's different levels of what you can understand about a place depending on how close you are to that place. For example, I had a novel where I needed to have a scene in Red Hook, New York. I go on Google Maps, I go down, I walk through the streets, I can describe a building. But unless you have a connection to the community, there are certain things that will always stay under the surface. Specifically, I have a manuscript I'm working on which takes place in Missouri, and in that manuscript, racism is an important factor. And if I hadn't grown up where I grew up in Missouri, I wouldn't understand it, because if you go to these towns where I grew up, people won't come to you and trust you enough to say, here's what I really think. But when you grow up there, you're within the culture and people trust you and they say, well, here's what I really think. And I grew up with a very skewed understanding of race relations because of where I was. Now, a visitor to that town, even someone who's been there a decade, might not understand that level. They'll see the surface, they'll see the fights, they'll see, you know, the tension on the surface, but they won't understand where that tension's coming from. And so, you know, even where I live now, I've lived there for 25 years, I don't understand that, in the dynamics of the people in that town as much as I understood the people where I grew up. And I think having that depth of understanding of the community around you is important to, I guess you could use your imagination and imagine the source of it is. But when you live it and you know it, you know, and listening to these fellow panelists, they live their communities, they live their societies, they can speak with great authority on what is happening, and nobody can question that authority because of their experiences and my experiences. So I think it's integral to really go beyond just being there and looking around and listening and describing, you know, the visceral aspect of it, to getting deep within the characters of the people who are in the community, and that takes trust and that takes time, and that's really hard to do. So I think when they say write what you know is an old adage that I don't know if it's valid anymore, but when you write what you know with that kind of depth, you have more authority, and I think it comes across on the page much better, if that makes sense.
You don't have to question their authority, but if you have questions, just raise your hand. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I don't know if you want to answer this question now, but at some point in time, I really would appreciate this way down here.
Does anybody want to take that on, the idea of a small place, or actually also a place that's mobile too, the idea of moving through space? And I mean, it sounds a bit like the people are the place for each other as much as, you know, there is a place. But did anybody have an immediate reaction to that?
My first thought is sometimes a place can be a character. In a lot of novels, a lot of stories, the antagonist could be a place, man against nature. The place could be what they call a threshold guardian. It's a test you have to pass to get to the next level. So even though it's a place, if you think of it in terms of that place being a character, especially if you're talking about a car, that might answer your question. That's how I would look at it if it were me trying to tackle that issue.
That actually sounds really expensive to me as well. I guess especially if they're getting out of the car, if they're visiting places. I really like Brutus. I'm a real dog person, and put that out there as well. So I'd see like a lot of opportunity in that. I wouldn't really see it as a compact and restrained space at all. And I think when you're passing scenery as well, I've written quite a few poems around the road trips that I used to do in the North Island in Auckland, and there is so much you can kind of get from moving through space, as Hugh was saying. I would see a lot of opportunities in that idea.
I'd like to add something. Last week, days ago, we went to New Orleans, and we had this at the New Orleans Center of Creative Arts. We met some young students, and one of the things I told them was, you know, it was kind of a shock to me seeing high school students, the freedom to wear their hair the way they want to, come to school with dreadlocks, mohawks, nose rings, bow, this ring, the one you pass through here, yeah. This and all that, which is so different from my experiences growing up, because in my own secondary school, we call it secondary school, what you call high school, we were forced to wear, make our hairs cornrows, and each morning we have this mistress who goes around and ensure you wear the hairstyle. If you don't, she will give you the first warning. Second warning, she will shave your hair. At least my hair was shaved twice because I was quite rebel. So if I am writing, like most of my friends know this, I'm writing a story set here. My experience is this cultural shock, because coming here and you going through a place you've never been to, just like driving past, you get to catch all those things, and it enables you interrogate your own experience back home, the things you know. I don't know, the truthfulness for me, what matters to me is being truthful, capturing the essence of what I see, not being truthful to the story, being truthful to the place, even though I don't have the permission to really write about it because I don't know the cultural experiences of people there, but I can see what I can see, I can capture it. And I don't think I need permission to really write about a place, but the thing there is being truthful to myself and capturing the essence of what I see at that particular time, and I'm moving on to the next level, yeah.
Virginia, do you want to talk a little, people have talked a lot about what they can see, but you were talking a little bit about temporality and the presence of the past and the presence of the future in the place that you're in right now, and those layers of maybe not what's immediately visible or experienceable in the tactily, you know, sensorially, it's not here, but it's a part of the mental space, as though you're moving through time, as though even in the present you're moving through time. Is that a factor in your work, trying to navigate all these layers of time?
I think it is a factor in most writers from Hong Kong, you know, the sense of time and the sense of space. But I'd like to respond to the question just now. I'm not sure if I heard the question correctly, but I think the idea of motion versus place or being fixed to a place is a very interesting dichotomy and one that you can leverage a lot in whatever writing you're working on, creative or nonfiction. I mean, for me, it's interesting that this topic comes up because I think it's something that really is taken for granted. Even if you write magical surrealism or surrealism or whatever you talk about, and place is really inevitable. Of course, you can do away with it, but somehow it will crop up because this is one of the essence of human existence, right? We don't exist in a vacuum. We exist somewhere at some point in time. So it's a given. But I think, as I said in my little part one thesis, that one can always transcend it and sort of soar to a higher stratosphere, so to speak. And sometimes I try to liberate myself from the constraints of space or place to your inner place, which I think, you know, is a very rich field for exploration, you know, your inner space. And indeed, if you look at classical Chinese literature, I mean, most of our great writers were also very accomplished scholars and also senior civil servants in the imperial court. And they got banished from time to time because of, you know, being implicated in political scandals or whatnot. And when they were sort of away from the court, they were banished. What did they do? They wrote poems, sort of found an inner space within themselves, and that helped them vista of evaluate and being sort of atonement with nature. So this kind of dichotomy, the inner space and the outer space or the outer place, not outer space up there, but you know, the outer place, is always very useful to whatever artistic pursuit you are going after. So I think the inner space is a very important treasure trove for us to work on.
There was a trend on YouTube, it may be still going on, where people take pictures of themselves every day or every month maybe at the same time every day, and then they compile them into a montage. And I remember the first one I saw, I think the guy had done it for 7 years, you know, and it was 5 or 6 minutes of headshots of him that he must have taken at 3 o'clock or 10 in the morning every day. And he gave each snapshot only a half a second or a quarter of a second. And so it looked like he was flying through his life. His head was perfectly stationary. Hair would grow, hair would be cut, you know, and he'd get sick, he'd get better, he'd tan, and it was 6 minutes, 7 years of his life, and there's this balance of the inner and the outer. You know, you could see you could see this fairly sad guy. I don't want to, I'm sorry.
7 years, wow.
Yeah, I know to do that. Well,
But clearly disciplined. Yeah.
very disciplined, yeah,
Was it in the same mirror every day as well? So he didn't travel anywhere?
No, he's in different places
Oh,
too, which gives it this element of flight. But the idea that you can be moving through time and space, but that inner self is sort of always there and present and constantly revealing itself. And the more you travel through space, I don't know, it's a way of sort of shearing it away and making it more evident. So I tend to agree with you.
Yes, Hugh, it's interesting that you brought up the subject of a digital world, what we're doing, selfies and Facebook and everything, because it does raise a brand new issue of our existence in cyberspace or cyberplace, which obviously is out of today's syllabus. But it's something that we can think about. In future, there may be a whole new genre of literature derived from this somewhere cyberspace out there. I don't know what that form will take, but yeah.
Definitely. Were there other questions? Yes.
I'm on a committee that chooses a book every year for the whole state of Iowa to read. And we've been doing that for 12 years. And one of the, there's very few set rules, but one of them that can be broken is that somehow this book could have a Midwestern connection. And I think that came, I've been on the committee since the beginning. I think at the beginning we were trying to sort of...
He's saying your mic's not on. Sorry.
Okay. So I think at the beginning we were trying to sort of stand up for the Midwestern sense of place, feeling that often those of us in the Midwest are, overshadowed by the glamour and the glitz and the activity that's going on either coast and, the flyover part of the country and all that. And, I'm sort of getting to a place, maybe I've just done it long enough, that I think we should branch out a little bit and bring in some other senses of place. But Midwesterns are a little stuck in their routine. And how do you, Courtney, you talked about, this is what the market wants, but I'm going to be true to my voice. But if you're someone who, I'm a librarian too, so if you're someone who's trying to open up some new avenues to people, some new senses of place, whether they be a geography or a place where you live in a sense of fear, which I have never in my life lived there, what's some ways we can do that?
In New Zealand, I sit on the literature sector steering group for the country, and we also have the best. We've had it for a few years now, and I'm really excited to hear you speak about how can we widen this up or broaden this out or like a different sense of we've done. I think is we've kind of just played it safe, really choosing these kind of iconic New Zealand novels by New Zealand writers. I have the same questions myself but also I think it comes down to the objectives. We're looking at literacy. We want to get young people interested in reading New Zealand books. We're also interested in trying to get New Zealanders to read New Zealand books. We also want to make sure that the New Zealand Book Council is right at the centre of New Zealand literature and New Zealand, and conversations we're having about books. And so this is one really neat way that we can ensure that they are leading that conversation too. So I guess it really comes down to your vision and your objectives and what it is that you're trying to get across. In Auckland, you're looking at literature there, and especially like the Auckland Writers' Festival, and if you have sponsors and investors who kind of see Auckland as this a tourism destination, the picks for what people should be reading are very different, because it's not so much for pleasure. It's like, come here, look at this. It's this kind of mystical, beautiful place where we're just living in peace. It's fantastic. Come to New Zealand and spend a lot of money. So yeah, I think it just comes down to your vision.
Did anybody else want to react to the idea that to help with a sense of place, you don't necessarily have to read? I mean, I'm taking it as sort of the idea that you don't always have to recognize the place in what you're reading as your own place to somehow reading about other places. I mean, so this idea of triangulating, you know, to read about someplace else. I mean, I read an incredible amount of literature set places other than Iowa. You know, there's not a big body of literature that's Iowa City based, you know, and so I read about other countries. I read about road trips, you know, landscapes, undersea, in the space, you know, but can we read about other places and still feel, will they make us less grounded or more grounded in where we are? I mean, I think that's the gist of the question, right? How do we read beyond where we are?
Well, I think if you find books where the struggle of the characters in the novel are consistent with the struggles of the characters of Iowans, they would relate, whether it's, you know, here or somewhere far away. It might, I mean, what comes to mind is The Good Earth. There's a very strong work ethic, and there's this you know, religious base to it that I think, you know, something like that, even though it's far away, would translate well here. But
well, I come back to that word I used earlier about emotion, the emotional life. I mean, I think we're all, by virtue of fate or birth or whatever, we're from different places. But when you're trying to do something in whatever piece of writing you're doing, is you're trying to build a connection with somebody else. I mean, you know, you sit alone in some room writing it, someone sits alone in some room reading it, and what really counts actually is what's happening in between you. That's the magic of why we do what we do, I think. And to do that, you have to connect on an emotional plane. We all have these various different lives, but what is the common currency between us to be human is to yearn, I mean, everyone feels betrayal, curiosity, anger, all those things are consistent no matter where we're from. So that's what, if anything that you're wanting your constituency to read, they have to just connect on that level. That's what it's about. It's not about whether or not, you know, I've experienced religious persecution in some specific place. What we know what it does mean to have to feel put upon or marginalized, or to have to what it feels to have to abandon one place for another. We all know what loss feels like. So I think you're compelled to open the world out. I mean, otherwise you run the danger of what can become isolationism and can turn into a kind. There's nothing wrong with cheering for the local team, right? But on some level, you know, then if you back yourself into a xenophobic place, and we're watching some of that kind of movement happening globally, and those are shifts that I think are the dangers, because people are not being able to have a connection or understand the compassion of others, quote unquote others. I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks ago I read that piece there was a piece about this new DNA research they've been doing, and evidently like
23andMe is, you know, where you can actually find out your own.
Even more than that, they said evidently like some 95% of the entire global population all derives from one single emigration that came out of Africa. So the point is that we are all connected, right? So are we trying to capture a place, you know, a sense of place, or are we trying to capture a place of sense? You know, in another way is one way to look at that.
I don't know anything about local writing or our writing of the Midwest. I don't even know that I really understand what Midwest means to me. But in any case, so I won't venture into that very risky area for me. But as a general sort of thought to share with you is that I think if I were living here in the Middle East or Midwest or whatever, I think it is important to be as Midwest as you can be. I mean, to do otherwise would be to neutralize or dilute your brand, because the Midwest is what, you know, I've come here for. I've, you know, like I have always longed to go to Mississippi, so I finally did it, you know, a few days ago, and I took the ferry ride on Mississippi while we were in New Orleans. So be yourself. I think the fun about the sense of place and this discussion is not really about the place, you know, or the farmer's market or whatever we're talking about. It's really about authenticity, you know, as you so rightly pointed out. And people who know, or even people who don't know, somehow the readers are very smart. They will feel whether you are, or the writer is being authentic or not, whether the connection, the emotional connection is true or not. And people always find out. You can never run away with it. So, so I think authenticity is the thing. And there are very good writers, very good directors, very good sculptors, whatever, who only do one thing their entire life. You know, you can write about Iowa or just a tiny village in Iowa or somewhere in Shanxi province of China. Nobody has ever heard of it. But you can be very good and you can win the Nobel Prize for it. I mean, so it's not the place that matters. It's the beauty and the authenticity that matters, I think. So, you know, that's what I think. And no need to fear that, you know, people will find we're provincial or whatever. So I think it's just be true to it. Yeah.
Okay, mine is a bit deviation from what you said. I worked in the bank for 7 years, and each year we do this community project where we donate, we contribute money, we buy books, and we send to high school, secondary school students. Mostly what they were doing before I joined was we buy Western books, British, American books, and we send to high school students. And we have this massive consumption of American books because they are cheaper, much more than the local books by local authors. But then 3 years before I left, we tried something. We bought books by mostly Nigerian authors, and we sent out to high schools. And then we started getting these responses. And it reminded me of what Nigerian author Chimamanda Adichie said, that growing up, she always read these British books, American books, and then she always had this craving for ginger beer, even though she never had ginger beer until when she traveled abroad for the first time. The first thing she wanted to do was to drink that ginger beer because she read about them in the book. And like my little cousin in the village then, he said, oh, I want an apple. We don't grow apples in Nigeria. Mostly what we have in the city is imported from South Africa. So you say A is for apple. But we don't have apple in Nigeria. But we have other. So when we now got the books by local authors, the responses we were getting were like young students started saying that they didn't even expect that they could be in stories. You know, they've always been related, reading about Cinderella's, young girls with blonde hairs, brunette and blue eyes, gray eyes and all that. But reading about Nigerian authors gave them a new sense of belonging. And they said, so the next year there was this suggestion to anthologize their short stories. And we got this massive submissions from high school students 13, 14, 15, 16 years. And then we had this anthology for them. And after I left, it became, I left in 2014. They had another one in 2015, and they had another one in 2016. So they started having this massive submission. So there's this yearn for writing their own stories because they eventually found out that they can exist in stories. So while you are talking about reading only Midwestern, you know, ours is we read the West. Now it's time to come back home and to now have this new sense of and realizing that they can actually go to Lagos and stand in a motor park in Lagos and see what happens in Lagos and document it in Lagos, you know, write about it. So that's it. Thank you.
I think it's, we're supposed to go till 10, yeah. And so with apologies to those of you who still have questions, I like ending on the idea that half the people say we should read more globally, others say we have to read more locally. So all the fish are swimming in both directions. So
the answer is both.
both.
Yeah.
All right, both.